Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Greg Olma with Key Performance Ideas, and I would like to welcome you to part one of our two-part webinar series, Data Integration Options for EPM Cloud. Today's webinar will be presented by Deanna Sunde. Deanna is an Oracle ACE Associate and the Delivery Director for the West Region. A recognized thought leader in the EPM community, Deanna is a frequent speaker at user group conferences, including Oracle OpenWorld, Collaborate, and Kscope. Deanna is also a certified implementation specialist for Hyperion Planning and Essbase. Welcome, Deanna, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Greg. Our agenda for today is first we're going to introduce you to EPM Cloud and EPM Cloud integration. And then we'll talk about metadata integration and automating metadata loads with EPM Automate and some metadata use cases and how to migrate metadata from on-premise systems. Then we'll talk about data, including the import and export data job, both the Essbase and Planning formats, and using business rules to do data export. This is part one of a two-part series. The part two will be held December 14th at this same time. The link is here for you to register for that event. And for part two, we'll be talking about loading data with data management, using EPM Automate and the REST API, and moving data between databases within an application using Smart Push and data synchronization, and also how to move data using XREF and XWrite, some data movement use cases, and migrating between environments like between test and prods and vice versa, and performing backups and disaster recovery. I'm also writing a series of blogs on these topics about integrating metadata and data. You can subscribe to our blog at the link here, and this will also give you alerts on product news, tips and tricks, and lessons learned. So our material is very educational, so I would encourage you to take advantage of signing up for our blog. So to start off with, here's an introduction to EPM Cloud. EPM Cloud applications are available to customers as a software as a service deployment, which means that it's a per member per month licensing. The EPM SaaS applications are PBCS, Planning and Budgeting Cloud Service, EPBCS, Enterprise Planning and Budgeting Cloud Service, and FCCS, which is Financial Close and Consolidation Cloud Service. So what's common amongst these applications is that Essbase is the underlying database. So planning was taken as porting from on-premise to the cloud. So just like on-premise, the cloud is based on Essbase. FCCS for consolidations was rewritten, so it is not the same as HFM on-premise. It's fully rewritten, and Essbase is its underlying database as well. They use the same integration tools, which include data management, EPM Automate, et cetera, and the same reporting tools, financial reporting, smart view, dashboards. So it's really cool that all of the EPM applications use the same tool set. Makes it really easy to apply your knowledge across the different applications and not have to learn new things. So here are some reasons why organizations are moving to the cloud. Basically, there's two big reasons, either economics or because of the functionality or both. So the cloud requires little to no IT involvement. Things like backups and patching and upgrades are performed automatically. It allows you to reuse your servers for other purposes or get rid of them entirely, and you can also avoid high energy costs for hardware. You're able to expense the subscription fees versus capitalizing a license cost. If you are growing and you need to add applications or users, you only have to update your subscription. You don't have to do like install more servers or install any additional software. So with the cloud, you get a very quick implementation with a fast ROI. And also the implementations cost to migrate from on-premise fairly low. Users really love Hyperion, the functionality and analytics and reporting capabilities. It's a very trusted name, and probably the biggest selling feature is Smart View, so you can do ad hoc reporting using the Smart View Excel add-in. People just love that. Finance users just never want to move away from Excel. The current solution for some clients, when it becomes outdated or unsupported, that's a good reason for them to move to the cloud. Also, the latest functionality is available in the cloud first. So there are monthly updates for the cloud for patches and new functionality that are automatically applied. Versus on-premise, the functionality may take like 6 months or more to become available for on-premise applications, and then it may require you to do like a big upgrade procedure in order to move to the later versions of the software. So that's a big advantage of the cloud. So there's a lot of automated administration that comes out of the box with the cloud, the patching, the backups, diagnostics, tuning, and monitoring. So there's a lot of things that will happen just automatically, so it makes the administration much easier. So next we'll move into an introduction to EPM Cloud integration. Here's a comparison between on-premise tools and the cloud. So for scripting, we're going to cover that in Part 1 and Part 2 of this series. For the metadata loads and the data exports, that'll be in Part 1, which is this webinar. When we get into some of the other data loads and movements within EPM, that'll be part of Part 2 of this series. So for scripting with on-premise, typically you would use like batch scripting, shell scripting, and BB scripting, and maxl. So, but with the cloud, you can still do like that in shell and BB scripting, but instead of maxl, you would use a tool called EPM Automate, which will do a lot of the functions that you would typically do in maxl. There's another tool called the REST API, which gives extended functionality. EPM Automate actually sits on top of, is part of the REST API. That's part of its underlying foundation. But most customers, EPM Automate will be just fine. For metadata loads and planning, you would, on-premise, you would use the outline load utility, and in Essbase, you would use dimension build rules. For planning on the cloud and EPBCS and FCCS, you would use what's called a metadata import job instead. On-premise, you have the ability to use ODI and FDMEE. The cloud, if you're on the proper release, also will allow you to use FDMEE capabilities. EPMA is also a way to manage your metadata with on-premise, but there is no EPMA on the cloud. If you are on EPMA, there is a setting that you can change in order to be able to export your metadata as if you were in classic mode. So that can be very useful for migrations. In on-premise, you have the ability also to use DRM, data relationship management. In the cloud, you could load flat files that came from DRM implementation if it's in the proper format. There is a more kind of DRM light version coming soon to the cloud, so I'm interested to see what those capabilities are. For data exports, you can run a business rule data export command, which is also available in the cloud. In addition, the cloud, you can run a data export job, which could be in planning format or Essbase format. And in on-premise, you can also do like a data export using an EAS export, where you just do from the Essbase application server, you would just do like a level 0 export. With the cloud, the way that you would do that would be, again, running a business rule or a data export job. For data loads and on-premise, you have the ability to use data load rules, which would be the most typical way of loading in data into Essbase. In the cloud, there is what is called data management, which is basically a light version of FDMEE. And also, again, to load data with on-premise, you could do ODI or FDMEE, and in the cloud, you can also use FDMEE, again, if you're on the release that supports the cloud. To move data within your EPM application from like one plan type to another, say you're like have data in workforce planning that you need to copy into your main financial application, there's a number of ways to do that. With on-premise, you can use Smart Push beginning in 11.124. That's also available on the cloud. It's a way to basically push data from one application to another, and it also can be used on a form. So like when a user saves a form, it can be automatically push that data. On-premise also has something called Map Reporting Application that was first available in 11.123, which is kind of similar to Smart Push. In the cloud, there's something similar called Data Synchronization, which is part of data management. So the difference there is that can be scheduled, and data synchronization is better for large amounts of data, while Smart Push is better for smaller amounts of data where you're just going from what's being selected in a form and pushing that. With on-premise, you can also move data from one plan type to another with xref or xwrite functions, and you can do that with the cloud as well. These three are probably the best ways to move data within the plan type. You could also, in either on-premise or the cloud, do a business rule that does some kind of a data export and then re-import that. That would be a possibility. In on-premise, you also have partitions, but there are no partitions on the cloud. That's not part of the cloud functionality. But between those other options, that really should absolutely meet your needs. So to get into some information on loading metadata, so there are various ways to update your metadata in the cloud. You can, if you're just doing a few little, changes, more of an ad hoc kind of nature, you can do that within the application, so similar to on-premise, but you would navigate to create and manage dimensions as an administrator to do that. You can also use SmartView to update your metadata. There's also a new dimension editor that's available that KPI just put out a blog on that you can take a look at. Those are all more like ad hoc ways where you're interacting and updating the metadata. But if you're loading from files, like you have a source file that is like from your ERP system, you're going to want to do more like bulk loading. These next options, which are creating an import metadata job. Similarly, you can create an export metadata job. These kind of processes can be automated within EPM Automate, and you can set up a Windows or a scheduled task or use Linux to automate that. One thing that's a little bit different between on-premise and the cloud is if you have a dimension that has attributes associated with them, with the cloud you have to include the attributes in the file or they will be wiped out. So versus on-premise, you can load a file that doesn't have attributes to update parts of your metadata, but that's not an option with the cloud. Another way to update your metadata is to take an artifact snapshot. So this is the same thing as on-premise, where it's called lifecycle management, where you basically get a snapshot of everything, all your objects, including your metadata, your Essbase data, forms, business rules, everything, and you can just, if you wanted to, just export out metadata and edit it and then re-import it. So that's another option, but probably not used quite as often. We have a blog on metadata on the KPI site that talks more about the artifact snapshots because that's not part of this presentation, but if you're interested in that, just go to our blog. So to manually edit metadata in the cloud, it's similar to on-premise. Again, we navigate to create and manage dimensions, and then you would see the screenshot below. You can use the pencil icon or under the actions to edit. So here's the pencil, and you can also do things under actions. To run a refresh, similarly, you can go under actions and click refresh database or click the refresh icon over here. So whenever you make changes to the metadata, you need to make sure that you refresh it so it pushes those changes from planning over to, or FCCS over to the Essbase database. So that could impact the users, so because they won't be able to access things and do submit while that's happening. So the recommendation would be to run that off hours when you actually do the refresh, if you can. So another way to edit the metadata, you can navigate to Overview, and then under Actions, you can refresh the database there. And you also click Create, and then Options, and then click the Refresh button. You can also save this as a job that can be used when automating processes within EPM Automate. So this is just the refresh portion. It's a lot easier to do it from the dimension editor, but to create it as a job, you would need to to create it here. So you would first, as part of an EPM Automate job, load the metadata and then run this refresh job. So I'm going to talk first about exporting metadata because quite often you want to see what the metadata format needs to look like first. So we'll talk about exporting before we talk about importing. So to export, you would navigate to Applications, Overview, and then click on Dimensions, click on the Export button, click the Create button, and then for the location, you would select the outbox. So for the cloud, there's a concept called the inbox and outbox. So to export something, you want to export it to the outbox because then it's can be like a scheduled job. You can just download it from the box very easily to your downloads folder on your laptop or PC. In this case, I'm running the export on the product dimension, and I'm going to be choosing the delimiter of other, and I'm going to use a pipe in the box for the delimiter. So I definitely prefer a pipe delimiter because if you're exporting something like the accounts dimension, it will have formulas, and the formulas will contain things like commas and semicolons and things like that. So those are pretty bad choices for the delimiter. I would definitely recommend pipe or maybe tab, but I personally like pipe. Since we are selecting the outbox, we then will save it as a job. So this is can be useful to create jobs to export metadata if the metadata needs to be loaded elsewhere. So here's the screen print about that. So here's where I'm going into the export metadata, choosing up here the outbox. Down here, I'm selecting the product dimension. I'm choosing other as a delimiter with a pipe. And then here, when I click the Save as Job, then you can assign it a name for that job, and then just click the Save button. To run the job immediately, you'll see it now listed here as a job, and you just can come over what I call the wheel over here and then click Submit to run it. Then you would close out of this window and navigate to Applications Jobs, which allows you to see the completion status. Like you can see down here that the job was completed. And you can keep refreshing that to see it updated if it's taking a while. When the job is complete, then you would navigate to Application Overview and select Inbox Outbox Explorer from the Action menu. So the Action menu is over here. You select the Inbox Outbox Explorer. This is the Inbox Outbox here. You can select the file, click on the wheel again, and click Download File. So that'll take it to your laptop or desktop. It will be downloaded to your computer in a zip file, so it'll be a text file within a zip file. To schedule this as a job, you would navigate to Applications Jobs, click on the Schedule Jobs button, and then under what type of job it is, over here on the left, you can say Export Metadata, and you can either run it now or schedule it, and then you give it a name and how often to run it, so you can actually schedule it to run more than once. When you go to your downloads file on your computer, you'll see it as a text file. In this case, it's this name here, and then it's underneath this, within this zip file. You can then copy it and edit it and unzip it. But when you're editing these files, be careful what you use to edit it because Excel can cause problems. For example, it will remove things like leading zeros. So if your metadata has leading zeros, you definitely do not want to use Excel. The file also could be too large to use with Notepad, depending on how many members you have. So some other text editors you could use like TextPad or Notepad++. They'll definitely open larger files a lot easier. Note that one difference between premise and the cloud is that the header here is a little bit different. Normally it would say parent and child, but in our case for the cloud it'll actually give you the dimension name in the header. So that's just something to be aware of, especially if you're migrating from on-premise to the cloud and you've already got some integrations in place. When you are working with these text files, the columns can be in any order and not all the columns are required. So if a lot of things that you don't need, like if you're automatically always going to aggregate it, then you don't need to have the aggregation columns, for example. So if you can accept the defaults, you don't need all the columns here. There are quite a lot of properties that are used within planning, but yeah, if you can keep it simpler, that's certainly easier and better. Here's some examples of some import file formats. So this first one up here in the left-hand corner is like a profit center where that's the child, and we have the parent, and we have an alias. So that's the most simple way of doing it. So in this case, we're accepting the default data storage property, which is never share. We're accepting that the default that it just aggregates up the tree for the consolidation operator. So that's the most simple kind of example. This other example over here is a little bit more complicated. It's got, we're loading the product dimension. It's the parent, the alias, and it has a UDA, and it also has some attributes over here. So again, attributes, if they're associated with that dimension, you need to have them in the file. So to import metadata, that is very similar to running an export. First, we would upload the file to the inbox. You can then navigate to Application Overview to do that. Under Actions, you would, again, select the Inbox, Outbox Explorer. The formats that you can use are either text or CSV or zip files to upload. You then click the Upload. We browse to your file. You might want to click this Overwrite checkbox in case it's been uploaded before. And then you would click the Upload File button. You'll see a successful completion message, and you can just click OK to that. And then we will go back to the Inbox Outbox Explorer, and we'll see it listed there. So it's this import product text file, which is there. We can then click the Close button to import the file. Then we'll create a job. So we navigate to Application Overview, click on the Import button, and click on the Create button. For the location, we're going to select the inbox. You can actually import. You can import your metadata locally from your computer, but in this case, I'm trying to demonstrate doing jobs to do it so that these things can be automated. So then we would type in the name of the text file. You'll see it down here. And we're going to be importing import product.txt. It's an other with a pipe delimited format. If you want to clear all the members and reload the entire dimension, you would click on that button, or I should say checkbox. Then we would click the Save as Job button and give the job a name. We've called it Import Product Dimension. If we want to refresh the database to push those changes in the metadata from planning to Essbase, we would click this checkbox here, Refresh Database if import metadata is successful, and then we click the Save button. To run the job, we navigate to Application Jobs. We click the Schedule Jobs button, and we select the Import Metadata and Run Now. So over here on the left-hand side, we want to schedule a job where we're importing metadata. We want to run it immediately in this case, and then we would click the Next button. We would then select the job, and then click the Next button, and then click Finish. The job is going to run immediately because that's what we selected. It'll be in processing state here, and because we also wanted to refresh the database afterwards, that's also in the processing state. And then you can keep refreshing the button. Click the refresh to update the status until you see that actually complete. Okay, so now that we've actually created some jobs, now we can bring it all together with EPM Automate to automate the process. So first we would create an import metadata job, and you can choose that click refresh database checkbox if you want to, or you could have it be a separate step. In this case, we're running it all as within that same job. You can create subfolders first on your EPM Automate server or your local machine. So EPM Automate can run on a server or a local like laptop or desktop. It needs to be 64-bit. It can be Windows or Linux. It's just a really tiny program which you can download from your EPM Cloud instance to install it. It's very simple. It just takes a few minutes to install. So we're setting up our different folders to kind of organize all of our files here. So we have a script file, and then where the actual data import file sits. So then we would use a system variable script, so that reduces maintenance time. You can use the same variables across all your scripts, so you're reusing all those file paths and credentials and such. So we're setting like where the utility is installed, username and password. We're setting the URL for your cloud instance here and what the domain is. These are kind of like blocked out, some of that information for security reasons. We then would are setting a path for where the jobs are, and other files here for where the import jobs are, or for the file names themselves. So then we utilize a wrapper script as the primary script that does the majority of the tasks, and that will reference other scripts such as the variable script. So that bat file is here, and here's the steps of what's being done. So first off, what we're doing is this is just the REMs are just comments that we've included to explain what's happening. So the first thing that we're doing is we're executing the command file to bring in those variables. And then we're changing the directory to where our utility runs from, and then we're calling the EPM Automate program to log in with the credentials that came from our variable file. And then we're next deleting the old file. So if that metadata file exists and you try to upload on top of it, it will error out, so the job will error. So we first need to delete our file. And then here we're uploading our file onto the cloud. So the file will exist on the EPM Automate server, and we're uploading it to the cloud. Then we're going to run the import job, where we're importing that metadata that we just uploaded. And then we're logging out. So it's not that difficult, pretty easy to do a few steps to upload, to run our metadata automation. So this could then, this bat file that we've created here could be like a scheduled task in Windows or some kind of job within, if it's a Linux server, to run it, say, every day or every week whenever you're going to have a file dropped onto that server in that location. You can then, schedule this job to run. So this is just going into a little bit more information on what we just covered. So now I have some use cases on metadata. So I've done some special things for clients where we did a little bit of customization. So this might give you some ideas on how you can make this, make your processes work more efficiently and effectively. So in this case, the client wanted users to be able to update aliases, which are the descriptions for the metadata for their marketing programs and subprograms, but that typically is only an administrator job to update metadata aliases. You don't want to give administrator rights to all the users. That would not be a good idea. So in this case, what we did to solve for what the client needed was that we added a new account, which was defined as a text account and included in a form. So it was like free-form text that the user could enter into in that new kind of account. And 3 times a day, we would export that information from that account and then transform it and load it as an alias. So we had a metadata load job to load it into. So we also used a different version for this input of the text information because we needed the users to be able to input that free-form text for the description at both the bottom level marked subprograms and also at upper level parent programs. So in order to do that, we created a top-down version, which is a version where you just define it as top-down, which allows input at parent levels instead of a bottoms-up version, which only allows input at the bottom level, which is more typical. We then use the export metadata job to export information, and we did a script to format the file, and then we reloaded using the import metadata job. So the process was run by a scheduled task using EPM Automate. So similarly, we had a situation where they wanted the users to be able to update attributes. So to solve for this, we created some smart lists which are one-to-one with the attribute dimensions. So there are 4 attribute dimensions that were being uploaded. So, the users were inputting. So we created 4 smart lists to correspond to those attributes. And we created 4 new accounts that had those smart lists attached. 3 times a day that information was exported, and then we transformed it, and then we used the import metadata job to reload it. And that was, again, a process run through a scheduled task using EPM Automate. So visually, just to kind of see what that form looked like to the users, these are like their programs and sub-programs over here on the left. Here's the column where they would input those aliases or descriptions, and these are the 4 attribute dimensions where they would pick from a drop-down to select the attributes. Another case for the same client was that they wanted to automatically create SAP I/O code.
Mute on.
So an I/O code in SAP is an internal order code. It's at a level where a budget is associated with it in SAP. So in order to do that, we would export the marketing programs for which there was data using a business rule, and then we used the metadata export to export all the marketing programs, which provided the alias, and then there was some scripting to join those 2 files together and produce the code that was needed to create the SAP internal order code, and then that there were some scripts to format the file further and to load it into SAP. So here's some tips on migrating from on-premise to the cloud when it comes to metadata. To export metadata from on-premise, depending on the version that you are on, you can use the administration, import and export metadata to file, which creates like a CSV file, and it's directly from where you would do from the application. So it's in more recent versions of planning. You can also export with lifecycle management. Another way to export would be using the outline load utility. That produces also a nice CSV file that you can use to export and then format and load into the cloud. And then after you've edited the file as needed, you would refresh the database after loading each dimension. So rather than loading like all your dimensions up and then refreshing, I would recommend that after you load one dimension, you do a refresh so that you can, deal with those any kind of errors that you might have before moving on. Also verify all your member counts, both total and stored after loading each dimension, to make sure that the number of members that you have in the cloud is the same as on premise. Because there's a dependency here, you want to load your attribute dimensions first, and then you would want to load dimensions that do not have formulas that refer to other dimensions next. Then you would load any dimensions that do have formulas that refer to other dimensions lastly. And I would recommend that you load the account dimension last if possible, because it is the most complex. It has the most properties. So here are some potential issues that you may face when you're migrating metadata from on-premise. One thing I've seen at actually several clients is that they had shared members that occurred before the stored members. So I'm not sure how that ever happened, because that's actually not allowed. But I think if they were on like older versions of planning, that somehow got through. So those were some things where we had to like switch them around to make it actually work properly, because the stored member must come before the shared. We also have some clients where we've found that they had a lot of dimension members and more than 20,000.
Mute off.
In case we needed to break the file into more than one file to get them to load, otherwise it just kind of freezes. With the cloud for planning and PBCS and EPBCS, it's required that you create an ASO database as part of the setup. You don't have to necessarily use it, but the structure needs to be in place. So because of that, you may need to update your hierarchy somewhat. For example, with ASO, a member can occur in each hierarchy only once. So you may need to move some things around to accommodate that restriction. We also found that when we would load up like member formulas, there might be some missing double quotes. So that's something to look out for. If you have an EPMA application, you can change a setting and stop the planning service and restart it, and then perform the LCM export in order to actually export it as classic. So here's some other use cases for importing and exporting data. So in this case, we're talking about data, so we're moving from metadata onto data. So in the Essbase format, I recommend using that import format when you're loading historical data. For example, when you're migrating from on-premise to the cloud, you can export data from Essbase as like a level 0 columnar format, for example, and then we can load that into PBCS quite easily. An export format for Essbase is not possible, but you can use in this using a data export. That's not possible, but you could create a business rule to do the data export command, similar to on-premise. You can use a planning format to either import or export to the cloud. So some use cases for why you might want to do that is to maybe export from one planning application or FCCS to load into another EPM Cloud application. Also with the planning format of the exporting of data, one really cool thing about it is that you have the option to export smart lists, either as like a label or a name. So that might help you to integrate with other applications and systems. So when you're doing a data import with the Essbase format, you can upload the file to the inbox as either a text, CSV, or a zip file. The zip file is quite nice because if you have like large data files, it can take a long time to upload them into the cloud. So the zip will help make that faster. The format needs to be tab delimited without a header. So if you're going from on-premise again, you would want to export in column format. So here's an example of what that format looks like. Then we would navigate to Overview, and under Actions, we select the Inbox Outbox Explorer and click Upload, and we browse to the file and we upload it into the inbox. Next, we would navigate to Overview, and under Actions, we select Import Data, and we click the Create button. And so in this case, what we're doing is we're saving this as a job. So we're saying that the location of the file is going to be the inbox. The type of file is it's an Essbase format. You need to select the cube name here. Don't forget to do that. You need to load your data to the right cube, the right plan type, and then we specify the name of our source file, including the extension of .txt. We save it as a job, click that button, and then we give it a name and save. So then we would submit the job again by clicking on the wheel. We click Submit, and it'll tell us our job was submitted. And then we go to the jobs console, essentially, to see the status, and it'll show when it is complete. If it's not complete, it'll refresh itself, but you can also click the refresh button. So to do a planning format, in this case, we're going to, again, select the inbox. Our source type is going to be planning. We're going to do a comma delimited file. So in this case, what we want to do is, on an export, is choose in the row area, you can choose one dimension for that. For the column, you choose one dimension, but it needs to be a dense dimension, so that's typically going to be a counts or period. I would recommend period. For the point of view section, you choose all your other things that you want to select for exporting. So, for example, if you want to export typically level 0 of your different dimensions, maybe just one particular year, scenario and version, for example. So there's different options here and functions that are used. And we're going to be exporting to the outbox and from the Plan 1 cube. And I would recommend that for dynamic members you exclude them because you probably don't need them. There may be cases that where you do, but if you can exclude them, that'll make it a lot faster. So the output will be either a CSV or text file within a zip file. Here's an example of what that looks like. So the planning format is, I'm not going to say it's the most beautiful thing. It gives you the end. In this case, we have entity, and then we're choosing 2 months. So that's the columns. So that's the January and February values here. And then the rest of the dimensions you'll see are within these double quotes. So formatting-wise, it's not the greatest, but it is very useful if you're going from one planning cube to another, or one cloud application to another. You can use that format. And then the last thing here is it shows the cube name. So another way to get data out is using the business rule data export command. It works just like on-premise. On the cloud, you can write a business rule to export the data. It works for both PBCS and EPBCS. It's not available for FCCS at this time, but I imagine that it's coming once FCCS allows you to write your own rules or edit rules. I think it might be available at that time, which I think is should be coming. I think it's coming pretty soon. So the process to do this is to navigate to create and manage rules. We would right-click on the plan type and then select New to create a new rule. We give the rule a name, and then we click the OK button. So that gets us to this screen here. From the menu, we would select either Edit Script. To go into the edit mode, you can type in your script, and you can use either a export file as text or CSV. And for the format, for the delimiter, you can use comma or pipe. You can also use tab delimited. For that, within this double quote here, there's actually a tab. So you make sure that's a tab, not a space, in order to do a tab delimited export. So we would run the data export command after we've done all of our settings and the fix statement. We're sending it to a file, tab delimited to this location. So it's always going to be U03 LCM, and then you just need to give it a file name here to go to the planning outbox, and that does need to be within these brackets. So this example here includes all the settings. So in this case, we're exporting it as column format. So that's pretty useful for a lot of other systems to load it into, or to just have a kind of backup of your data. So one use case of using a business rule export is to have like a level 0 backup of your application, because when the artifact snapshot is created by Oracle that does the backup each night, it does an all-level export of your data. So it's got all levels of the data, and that can be quite large. And you have to restore from that because you've like downloaded onto your own server to keep like maybe the last 7 days or 10 days or some such, on your own server, to keep it off of the cloud, to upload it back to the cloud, all levels of the data, from all the bottom level data, all the parents, all entire database. That can be quite a large file. So I also recommend for large databases that you do a level 0 backup each night. So this would be a way to do that. So you would just specify within your fix file. In this case, I'm restricting it to actual and bottom level of the accounts dimension under NI, which is net income. But you can specify the entire database level 0 just by not having fixed and using the setting up here, which says data export level 0. So here we're going ahead and we're exporting it to a file that is comma delimited and called myexport.tax. So this business rule can be run on demand, or can be part of an EPM Automate job that is maybe a scheduled task that runs every night. So after you've written your script, from the actions menu, you would click Save, or the Save icon. So the Save icon is over here, and the Actions menu is over here. And then you can validate your script also from the Actions menu or clicking the Validate icon. And then you would deploy it, so don't forget to deploy it. Use the Actions menu to do that as well. So very similar to business rules in on-premise. And then you can launch it from here just by clicking the Launch icon. You can also instead go to Navigate Rules. You may need to click the refresh button to get it have it appear in your list of rules, and then you can just click on the Launch button here to launch it if you wish. So you can launch it from Navigate Rules instead of actually going all the way into Calculation Manager to launch it. Then you would go to the Navigate to Overview under Actions in the Inbox-Outbox Explorer. And again, click on the wheel and click Download, and you can download it to your computer. So you can either, when you're downloading files like this, you can either open it directly or you can save to File. I always save it as a file, so then it's in my Downloads folder. Especially large files, you're going to want to do that. You're not going to want to open it directly. So for data files, you definitely want to save it. So here's an example of what that business rule data export looks like. So notice it's a comma delimited file and in a column format, so it's pretty easy to work with other systems. Here's another use case of a way to use the data export business rule. So for this client, they were calculating data to be used for an accrual that was to be loaded into SAP. So a business rule data export was used to export that data. And another way you can use data is, say, to export maybe your forecast and budget data to be loaded into an ERP system, either Oracle or SAP or whatnot, if you want to load budget data into your ERP. I also had a client that had a consolidated PBCS environment. So my client had marketing information in a different PBCS environment. So we would export it out nightly, the forecast data to be loaded into the other PBCS environment. And again, another really good use case is to do level 0 exports of your data as part of your backup process. So again, the agenda here is for part 2, which is December 14th. We'll be covering loading data with data management, using EPM Automate and the REST API, using Smart Push and data synchronization, moving data around with XREF and XRIFE, other data movement use cases, and migrating between like test and prod and backups and disaster recovery. Here's my contact information, and I just wanted to thank you all for attending my webinar today.
Thank you, Deanna. And thank you all for joining us today for part 1 of our webinar series, Data Integration Options for EPM Cloud. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Deanna's contact information is displayed on your screen. Thank you again, and have a great day.